Hey there, this is Pat Ennis of Ennis Legacy Partners. Welcome to the Exit Readiness Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Walter Dial, CPA and tax partner at GRF CPAs and Advisors in Bethesda, Maryland. We also have with us today my business partner, Corby McGordon. Our mission here on the podcast is to provide you, the business owner, with subject matter expertise on topics pertaining to building transferable or sellable business value and for planning your eventual exit from the business. We want to help you build a business that's transferable or sellable and then exit successfully on your own terms and conditions. Walter, as a longtime partner in a professional services firm, I know you and your partners have worked very hard through the years to install a succession plan that allows retiring partners to leave successfully while at the same time affording great opportunity for the next generation to become partners and eventually also exit and retire from the firm. And, but you know, recent experience, we've both experienced this. More and more professional services firms are considering a sale of their firm to a third party, be it either to a strategic or buyer or a financial buyer. And again, as you're a partner in one of these firms, a CPA firm, advisory firm, from your perspective, what challenges, unique challenges, do you think professional services firms face when trying to sell to a third party?
I think the biggest issue is one that we've discussed a number of times on this podcast, and that's transferable business value versus the personal goodwill value of the owner. And I think that's especially true in professional service firms. So, like for instance, in our firm, within a few years of retirement, our goals as partners completely change, and the focus becomes transferring our existing client base to others in the firm. And that's something we're doing all along, but it really becomes an emphasis those last 2 years. And the goal is, if someone says to one of my clients, "Hey, who do you work with for your tax planning needs?" their answer should be GRF CPAs and Advisors instead of Walter Dial. Now, usually it is Walter Dial, but that's our goal, is to really transfer my goodwill into the firm, because that's what's going to help clients stay. And because it's such a difficult thing to do, my experience with most professional service firms that sell, they end up with an earnout because the buyers are just not confident that the clients are going to stick around. And there's usually a period of transition because the seller wants to get the best price. He wants to maximize the earnout. So he's willing to hang around for a few years to try to transition those clients. So that's pretty much what I'm seeing out there.
Yeah, well, today's episode, we're excited about it because we have with us Pete Martin, who he actually was able to sell a professional services firm for an outstanding multiple, and he did it without an earnout. And so today's episode is going to prove especially helpful to owners of professional services firms as we talk about how to sell a B2B services business for top dollar without an earnout. And again, Pete Martin, founder of Ask My Board. Pete has worked in sales ops, executive management for over 25 years, beginning with IBM, executive management at SAP, and then he's built 6 of his own companies. He's been personally involved in the sales of over $1 billion, that's with a B, dollars of software, services, and technology to global companies like Dow Chemical, Lockheed Martin, Eli Lilly, as well as a lot of small to medium-sized businesses. He started, scaled, and sold 4 out of 4 previous companies. 2 remain active, including Ask My Board. And with his latest firm, Entry Point, that's the professional services firm I was referencing a second ago, being sold to KPMG, Corby's old firm, for a crazy multiple. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, how to sell a professional business services firm for a crazy multiple. So Pete, hey, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Pat. I appreciate it. And Corby and Walter, I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Pete. Congratulations on such a successful sale of Entry Point. So let's begin with you providing an understanding of exactly what type of services Entry Point provided. What type of consulting did they do?
Yeah, good question. So we were what is classified as a systems integration firm, which means we would partner with ERP companies. In this case, specifically, it was SAP, which is the second or third largest software company in the world. And we would help implement SAP into companies, both Fortune 500 and small and medium-sized businesses as well. So we are an implementer of software and technology.
Okay, so SAP is a software system that you would sell to clients?
So we had three parts of the business. We had a pure consulting side of professional services where we would just purely implement the software and integrate it into different companies. And then we were also a reseller, but we had that as separately a separate business unit, separate line of business. And then we also had a managed services business where in some particular functions of a business, we actually would outsource that function for them. So SAP, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is what's called an ERP system. So it is essentially the entire back office for a company, everything from finance and accounting to sales and distribution, purchasing, manufacturing, and pretty much everything integrated into one system.
Pete, it seems like you had this kind of perfect confluence of being in the tech world with a very robust software, and you managed to package a service into almost a product. Can you talk about how you did that, how you even thought about doing that, and how you could help another owner do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, part of the issue with traditional consulting professional services firms is your revenue is very lumpy, right? And it's typically not very predictable. The only predictability that comes out of it is what your contract backlog looks like and what your commitments to the client are. And in fact, if they prepay it, that becomes a liability on the balance sheet, right? So after many years of having very lumpy revenue and not necessarily, waking up on January 1st and knowing what that year was going to look like, we said, we have to get smarter about this. And so we looked at the services that we were providing across a couple of our different practice areas. And we found that there was one particular part of the project that was fairly repeatable. And it's a little bit of cookie cutter. And as you might imagine, our profits were much higher in that particular type of a project. It was essentially a limited scope of kind of a larger project. So we took that, kind of limited set of functionality and limited set of kind of business impact, and we basically created a product offering out of that specifically. And what ended up coming out of that one was we created what we call a wedge offering. So it's essentially we could fix price that. It was typically the first step that any company would take in implementing this particular set of functionality within SAP. And we would fix price it and say, let's get started with this type of a project. And it kind of reduces the risk for them because it's fixed price. They know what their budget is. And we had lots of references. So then we use it as a wedge offering, very profitable. And then from there, we had kind of a land and expand strategy. And so we could build out our consulting services from there.
Nice. What percentage of revenue did that wedge product wind up being?
I don't think it ever got more than about 10 to 15% of our total revenues. It was never the intention to turn us into a product business. It would have been great if we could have done that, but there's just too many variables from client to client, too many differences in scope. But it really worked really, really well from both a marketing perspective and a ability to have some recurring revenue streams.
Wow, that's really neat. And it seems like you found like the ideal partner in SAP, if you will.
Yep.
Talk about how to select a B2B partner.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that came from the fact that I used to work for SAP. And it was very interesting because I worked for the company for just about 7 years in executive management, as Pat said. And when I left SAP in 2002, I made the conscious decision to not be a SAP partner. Most of the SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, a lot of the folks that leave those companies kind of immediately turn into the partner channel. And I strategically said, no, I want to go do something different. And after a year of being a COO for a company that just didn't work out, I said, I've got this asset base of a network and intellectual capital and everything else within the SAP ecosystem. Why throw that all away? So I
Right.
kind of went back and became a business partner from that perspective. But I think when you pick a B2B partner, whether it's in the technology arena or elsewhere, I think it's critical to understand what you're going to get from that partner. And I think a lot of professional services firms will create these alliances and these partnerships with these companies, expecting that that company, whether it's SAP or Oracle or Microsoft, is going to give them all this business. And the truth is something completely different. You have to build your own business. And in fact, our first year and a half in business, we actually went out of our way and spent a lot of investment dollars in marketing to actually give SAP deals because we knew we needed to prime the pump. And if you prime the pump in this, and from the partnership perspective, they see that you're bringing them value, you're actually bringing them revenue and deals, they will eventually reciprocate, right? And that will turn into this very long-term, great strategic relationship. But very few professional services firms get that. You know, they expect kind of the big giant machine to just give them deals, and that's just not the way it works.
Yeah. So start with who you know and provide benefit to them rather than look for it.
You got it. Exactly right.
That's good.
Yeah. So, hey, Pete, let's have you talk about the actual sale. How did it happen? Again, it was a 12 multiple on EBITDA,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Okay. So
Correct.
that's a good multiple any which way you look at it and cut it, but particularly for a professional services firm for all the reasons that we've talked about so far. So how did it come about? How did you make it happen? And let's talk about you not having an earnout, which is kind of nuts. So just start talking about that and we'll drill down with some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had decided about 12 to 18 months before we closed the deal to sell the business for a variety of reasons. As you mentioned earlier, I'm 6 companies in, so I kind of get to a point where I'm like, all right, time to move on to something else, right? I'm getting bored. So I'd made that strategic decision. And because I had sold 3 companies prior to that and probably left millions of dollars on the table, I had a little bit of education how to do this right. With one of those being, and Walter, you hit on this in the very beginning, is you've got to remove the owner, the founder, the CEO from the business unless you want an earnout. So I started out very strategically distancing myself from both the day-to-day operations and the client relationships. And I can kind of talk a little bit more about how I did that and how painful that was, because I'm a bit of a control freak, as most entrepreneurs and CEOs are. But I started this process of literally not engaging in sales cycles and a lot of the day-to-day operations. And there were 2 points of pain there. The one point of pain was me just stepping back from the business a little bit. The second point of pain was I didn't do a good enough job of communicating what was going on. I clearly didn't want to communicate to the staff that I was doing this in preparation for selling the business. So I just started dumping stuff on them, right? And hoping that they would step up. And thankfully they did, but there was probably a couple of quarters of consternation and confusion and why do I have to do this now? You were doing this before and what have you. But the net of that was by the time we got to the deal, I can talk about this a little bit more detail. As we went through the strategic process of doing due diligence, getting a letter of intent, and going through that whole process, there's a point in time where the deal got stuck essentially. And there was probably a month where there was literally no communication with KPMG. And so you might imagine I got extremely concerned that the deal was dead for some particular reason. So I called up my business sponsor, the guy who's basically driving this deal internally, and said, hey man, what's up? I haven't heard back from your M&A guys or your attorneys, or, it seems like it's dead. And he said, no, I'm not, honestly, I'm not sure what the problem is. And so I said, who's responsible for signing this deal ultimately? And he said, the vice chairman. I'm like, great, give me a meeting. He's like, you want a meeting with the vice chairman of KPMG? And I said, yep, that's the only way this thing is going to get unstuck. I want to find out what's going on. And I assure you, if you give me half an hour with this guy, I'll get the deal unstuck, whatever it is. Not knowing what it was, right? So he's like, all right, I have nothing to lose, right? So he gets me a meeting with the vice chairman. So about 2 weeks after, I fly up to New York, go into his office, and we have a little bit of small talk. And I said, look, it seems like you want to do this deal. We clearly want to do this deal. The deal seems to have gotten stuck. What's up? And he said, look, Pete, he said, we acquire a lot of companies, as you might imagine. He said, we've never acquired a company where the CEO and the founder didn't go with the deal. Why are you not going with the deal? And I had written that into the term sheet, right? That I was not going with the deal. There was no earnout. I was not going to be an employee, whatever. And I said, aha, I get it. And I said, well, first of all, I would be a really shitty employee. I don't know if I can cuss on your podcast, but I did. And he said, what do you mean? I said, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been running my own company for 15 years at this point. And I said, to go work for a big firm, I love KPMG. It's an amazing firm. I have a lot of respect for it, but I would not be a great employee for you. So I said, that's number one. I said, number two, I said, if you look at our backlog and our book of business over the last 12 months, I said, I can tell you the companies we did business with because I signed the contract. I couldn't tell you the names of the people that actually signed the contract, and they couldn't tell you my name, except that I'm CEO and I was the counter signatory. And I said, that's on purpose. So I said that the team that you're getting and the book of business you're getting and the IP that you're getting is all independent of Pete. And so he got it. He got both of those points. We basically shook on the deal and we finished up the deal. What we ended up doing was we didn't have any specific earnout. We did have 2 holdbacks essentially for pretty big chunk of the business or the valuation, about 20% of the value. 10% was based on essentially all the clients coming over, which was obviously important to them. So we made that happen. And then the other piece was we had a couple of key employees that they knew without these folks from the leadership perspective and from a business development perspective, they were not, they were fundamental to the business. So we put some milestones in place to make sure that they would stay for 6 months. So that was kind of the equivalent of an earnout. So all that happened perfectly well. I can tell you that the business case that they put together to buy the company, they exceeded it, which is great. So, even though I got a great valuation, they still even beat all the numbers. So my projections for them were pretty conservative, and everybody at the end of the day was very happy.
When you've gone from one company to another, do you have a key management group you take with you, or is it just you and then you kind of build the team from scratch?
Yeah, a lot of the businesses have been very different. If they were similar, I would have probably taken the same leadership team. Each time that I've sold, those folks have really grown. I mean, a lot of the reason that I sold was that we kind of hit a ceiling in terms of how much professional growth we could give the team. And so, you go inside a bigger firm, typically you can get a lot more professional growth if you can assimilate well. So I didn't really go from leadership team to leadership team. I've always basically created it new for the most part. So I've had a couple guys, particularly on my advisory boards and my boards, that I brought to each one, but not the leadership.
And did you have other owners of the companies? Do you have incentive comp plans in place, or how'd you take care of the other key employees when the companies were sold?
Yeah. So we created this very cool instrument we called a long-term incentive plan, and it was essentially the equivalent of phantom stock. And it was kind of a hybrid of a stock option and phantom stock. And so there was a vesting schedule with it, but it wasn't stock and it wasn't an option. And this was developed by our law firm. It's a terrific instrument. And essentially what it did was we would value. So in the case of a consulting firm, if you have independent practices, right? If you are shareholders and you bring on new leadership team and to bring on new practices, everybody gets diluted. So the way we built this long-term incentive plan was we said, all right, we're going to value your practice and you're going to get a percentage of that practice upon a liquidity event. If there's no liquidity event, you get 0. It doesn't mean anything. It's got 0 value, right? And so we're just going to value your part of the business. But if there is a liquidity event, we're going to take the multiple at the enterprise level and apply it to your practice. So let me give you, that's a lot of words. Let me give you an example. So let's just say you're running $1 million practice. There's no recurring revenue. You as a practice leader are tied to that business. And maybe that practice is only worth 4 times EBITDA. But we add a new practice that has recurring revenue streams, much more profitable. And so the enterprise value then is 10 times EBITDA or 3 times revenue, whatever it is, right? we will then apply the differential as kind of a additional bonus to that particular practice leader upon a liquidity event. And what that did was it incented the leadership team to bring on new practices because you're not getting diluted. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The bigger you are, the higher multiple you get, right? So there was an incentive to add practices, bring in a leadership team, scale the company. And, when professional services firms, I see a lot of business owners freely give away equity. Let's just say that, right? And I think it's a mistake. And I think if you really dig into what somebody coming into the firm wants in terms of equity, they want to pay out at the end if there's liquidity event, right? So we were able to sell this by saying, look, if we go get a line of credit and you have more than 5%, you're going to personally sign for a line of credit. Do you really want to do that? The answer is always no. And if, it goes to hell in a handbasket, do you want to be on the hook for that? No. Okay, great. Well, then here's an instrument that gives you that payout upon a liquidity event because that's what you want, but you're not a shareholder. You don't have to be tied to all these other things. And never had an issue with it.
Yeah.
And we've done that from company to company and it works really, really well.
That sounds like a great solution. Pete, your practices, were they employees, W-2s, or were they 1099s, the consultants that you have on your team?
They were virtually all employees. We had probably, from time to time, we'd have 5 to 10% that were independent contractors, just based on some specialized skill sets or, kind of getting through resource bubbles. But for the most part, these were employees.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another leadership question, Pete. You mentioned you're a control freak. One of the pain points was actually giving up control. How'd you do that?
Yeah, it was tough. I have to tell you. I think I kept my eye on kind of the end goal, which was this exit event, right? And this exit event with me not wanting to be tied to it. And so as long as I kind of held on to that, I got over I needed to control everything. And then in addition to that, because we were in the business of putting in structured systems in the companies, we started doing that to ourselves too. So in addition to starting to turn stuff over to the team, we also put a lot of systems in place to have those controls without me being involved. From a pricing perspective, we went to standardized pricing. We went to standardized levels for employees. We made sure, we had a standard contract for our clients. We had standard contracts for employees. And so we put a lot of that stuff in place. So we'd always had some of it, 75, 80%, but there was always the odd client that didn't have a contract and whatever. So we really spent some time putting that together. And what was interesting is I internally started essentially a data room. So for those of you not familiar what a data room is, it's all of the documents that an acquirer would want to see when they are acquiring your company. And so we started building this data room. And so we had essentially a bill of materials for everything that needed to be in that data room. And it really kind of stuck out what was missing, right? It was very obvious. And so that was a great way to say, all right, great. We've got these 5 employees that were, we brought on 10 years ago that don't have employment agreements. Let's fix that. We have these clients that didn't have client agreements. Let's fix that. POs with supplier, whatever it was. And so the process of kind of doing all of that, in addition to turning stuff over to the leadership team, gave me the comfort that the controls were kind of in place without me having to be my control guy. So.
Yeah. So Pete, then as KPMG did their due diligence, was everything that they asked for in your data room?
So just imagine going through diligence with the 4th largest auditing firm in the world, right?
Yeah, you're signing up for you're signing up for a rough few months there.
You got it. And so I will tell you, they were blown away with how put together we were. And again, a lot of this is because this was my 4th exit, right? And I knew the spiel. And in fact, I will tell you that probably 6 months in, I got a lot of feedback from our consultants that told us that we had better processes internally than KPMG did. Part of that was just there was just new processes, but they were pretty blown away with, as a small firm, kind of how put together we were. And so because we kind of walked into and this is a big factor of the valuation that we got, that because they saw we were a very professional firm and we had our act together and we approached this very professionally and strategically, it gave them a lot of confidence that this was a deal that they should go through with. So yeah, so pretty much everything, they'll always find stuff that's missing, or they'll want to tie numbers back together. And so a lot of times there's just an explanation. I had a couple of, younger financial analysts that went through the books about 50 times. But everything kind of ticked and tied. And so again, that kind of gave them the confidence that this was the real deal.
Hey, Pete, in your experience with the different companies that you sold and staying with the due diligence process, have you experienced this, or can you speak to this, where something goes wrong early on in due diligence? Is it possible to recover from that, or is your valuation just sunk in your experience?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think it depends on what it is that either hasn't been disclosed or can't be supplied or whatever, that will either impact the deal in terms of just they walk away from the deal, or gives them significant leverage to reprice the deal and have a new valuation. If it's anything fundamental on the financial side, like your books are just off and they start digging through, and every question they ask you, you either can't answer or your answer is wrong based on what you gave them, that's a deal killer. It's either a deal killer or they're going to go reprice the deal at the end, right? If it is anything that is that would cause a liability, an employee lawsuit, a supplier that sued you, and you didn't disclose that stuff, and they find out there's UCC filings, right, that you didn't disclose in the beginning, that's cause for, again, either lower valuation or killing the deal. There's some stuff that I would say, you said you had agreements with employees, and you've got 2 or 3 that they just slip through. Some of that stuff I don't think is a real big deal, and they expect that. That's the point of due diligence, right? But if it's anything material financial, if it's anything material from a potential liability perspective, you have to disclose that stuff, and you have to do that up front, and you have to do that at the right time in the process, right? Probably before due diligence, but as you're getting the term sheet, and you're kind of talking through terms, and you think this is a real deal without disclosing too much, you got to kind of bring some of that stuff to the fore.
You think, we deal with a lot of companies that are in the 5 to 20 million revenue range.
Yep.
You think it's critical that they have audited financial statements?
So we did not have audited financial statements. We had reviews. We had compilation for a couple of years, and we had reviewed statements for 2 or 3 years. I think it depends on the acquirer. If you can, I should help you sell your services, Walter. Yes, everybody should have audited financial statements.
Thank you. Okay, we're done.
I think from the perspective of having audited versus reviewed, I think it depends on the acquirer and the size of the business, whatever. If you can afford audited financials, absolutely have 2 to 3 years of audited financials. You'll be in a much better place when it comes to due diligence and deal structure. An audit is obviously much more expensive than a review. The review for us was fine. And they asked the question up front. They're like, we see your audited financials. We said, we don't have audited financials. Said they're reviewed. And they said, why not? And we said, because it's 35 grand versus 10 grand or whatever to do it. And we just didn't see the value in having audited. So we explained it away, and it was no big deal. I think it caused them to dig a little bit deeper into some of the financials and make sure that everything ticked and tied. And the fact that it did, again, gave them the comfort that it was not a big deal.
Yeah. Would you say, Pete, that because you were so tight in so many other areas, that resulted in them not being as concerned about the statements being audited?
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So Pete, what would you say to the guy that he hasn't built 6 companies, he's only got 1, and he's thinking, it's 10 years out for me. I can get my act together 2, 3 years before, and I should be good to go.
Yeah. So let me tell you a little story. So I have without disclosing anything, I have a client right now that I'm doing some business coaching with the rest of my board. And this is a company that's primed for sale. And they they've got all the right things. They got a couple million in the bank. They're very profitable. They've been growing the last 3 years. And, they brought me in to kind of help get ready for a potential exit. And it could be within 6 months and it could be within 2 years. We're kind of working through that. But I said, give me your financials, right? And they've got they've got an international subsidiary and a US subsidiary. They don't match, and it's not GAAP accounting. And I told them, I just said, you have to get this fixed, because if you bring in an M&A advisor, you bring in anybody that is serious and you want a higher valuation, they're going to say, give me your financials. What are the numbers? What was 2020? What was 2019? Right? Let's go look at the profitability. Your gross margins don't seem to match. What's your acquisition cost? Right? And so it's a mess. And so I said, we're going to spend the next 30 days to 45 days, and we're going to go hire a controller, and we're going to get this stuff cleaned up. And so it's the perfect example of, they thought this exit was down the road and they're making money and there's tons of money in the bank. So they didn't feel like it was necessary to do that. And they're kind of now seeing the pain of not having a lot of this stuff put in place. And M&A guys will talk about, I'm going to forget the 3Ds, but there are 3Ds when it comes to an exit. There's either, death, divorce, forget what the other one, or disaster, right? And so you don't want to be in that situation where you have to sell for one of those 3 reasons, outside, a strategic exit, and you don't have all of your internal stuff put together, right? And so Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce, has a great quote, and he said, or maybe it's Mark Cuban, I'm not sure which one of the Marks, and they said, every company should go public. And his statement behind that was, he said, you clean up everything internally when you go public, because you're getting all of this scrutiny, right? And you want to be able to stand up to that scrutiny. It's the same thing with any kind of a business. And so whether your exit is 10 years down the road or a year, it's just a good way to run the company, right? And if you're CEO, you want to know what your numbers are. You want to know if you're generating cash flow. You want to know if you've got, what your backlog looks like for the year. It's just good business to me. It has nothing to do with even an exit. But if you're going to have an exit, you got to have your house in order.
Yeah, and building that business and having your house in order the way you did, Pete, how much of the admin kind of back office kind of stuff did you build in-house, and how much did you, if anything, outsource?
I would say the majority of it we built in-house. We put I put my financial manager and 3 other people through a lot of pain for about 90 days to kind of get there, because they had to do their full-time job and do all this extra stuff. Once we got through that, it was probably 3-4 months of worth of serious work. Then it kind of died down and went back to kind of some state of normal. But it was pretty much, I don't think we really outsourced much of anything from a back office perspective. And again, because we were kind of unique in that, because we were in the business of doing this for large companies, and helping them get their house in order from a systems and process perspective, we kind of got it. And so we just, probably a bad analogy, but we pointed the gun back at ourselves, right? And said, all right, we need to get ourselves in shape too. So.
Okay, so you've been very generous with your time. We'll take just a couple more questions if you don't mind.
No, that's fine.
We talk a lot about building value, of course, the kind of value that you built, sellable or transferable value, and then the drivers of that value, some being, of course, financial performance being strong, recurring revenue, strong next level management team, strong net promoter score, number of others. In selling a professional services business, what do you think are the most key drivers of value?
Yeah. So if you break it all down, right? If I'm going to acquire your professional services firm, what am I really buying? I'm buying your book of business, right? And B, I'm buying your delivery vehicle. So whether that's software, technology, or people, I'm also buying that engine that's driving that book of business, right? That fundamentally, that's it. That's those 2 things. So, the book of business then goes back to the client base. Now you mentioned net promoter score. So we were a very, very, very early advocate and user of Net Promoter Score. We started using Net Promoter Score in 2003, probably 2 years after it was created. And in fact, I'll tell you a real quick story. So not only did we implement Net Promoter Score, but we were actually able to tie it down to the actual individual. And we put a variable compensation bonus program in place where we could tie the Net Promoter Score for the business with the Net Promoter Score for the individual. And if they were a promoter for both the business and the individual, they maxed out their variable bonus, and then it kind of went down from there. And it was so kind of cutting edge and profound. I got a call from the head of people operations for EY, who said, "Hey, we heard you're doing this. We want to tie it down to the business. Can you tell me how we did this?" And so we created a little consulting, engagement to go do that. But that got everybody aligned, towards it is all that matters is if that client is a promoter, if they're loyal. And that had a huge impact on our ability to scale because most of our business came from client referrals. So, kind of going back to your question, Pat, I think it is having a healthy book of business, and whether it's recurring or not, even if it's, there's a difference between recurring revenue and reoccurring revenue, right? And reoccurring revenue is, it may not be contractually obligated and this kind of monthly thing, but if you have support agreements, maintenance agreements, or you've got this project pipeline where there's 4 phases to it and 3, 4, and 5 are going to happen if you don't screw it up and they like you, that could be reoccurring revenue. And that's pretty powerful too. And that's very sellable too at good margins, at good valuation multiples. So, I think owner independence is great if you don't want an earnout, but it's not mandatory. It's the health of the business and the health of that delivery vehicle, again, whether it's the people or whatever. And particularly in a professional services firm, they want to know that team, Walter kind of hit this earlier on, is going to stick around, right? And if Walter leaves the firm, are those people going to follow Walter out, or are they going to stay with the new big company? And so there's a lot of strategies around just having a great culture so that they're going to stick around regardless. And then if that culture is going to change through an acquisition, making sure that there's incentives in place for those folks to stay around and deliver. If you have a service offering that is not dependent on those people, in other words, an acquirer can buy that book of business and deliver it on their own, it's a different story. It's probably a higher valuation, right? But that's very, very uncommon, frankly. So
yeah. So clearly, this was a strategic buy or strategic purchase. Was in regard to your team? Were they concerned about you having, as part of your team, a management team in place?
You mean KPMG or the employees?
Were they concerned in evaluating your company?
Yeah.
That you did or didn't have a management team in place? I mean,
they were very concerned. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to demonstrate that the leadership team that was going over from our company to theirs, they were the rainmakers. They were the guys that were managing the people, that had the trust, had the loyalty, and were bringing the business in. I think the biggest concern for me and for them was this massive cultural difference between, the traditional big firms are up and out, right? And it's great for some people who want to continue, that are ambitious and want to continue to move up through an organization. But even through the 2008 financial crisis, we didn't lay anybody off. And so that was a big concern for our employees and theirs, just, is this culture going to work? And we somewhat artificially kind of prolonged the process of due diligence so that they got to know us better. And in fact, before we started that process, I very strategically said, we do this, you do that, let's go chase a deal together. And so we went and we actually pursued a deal together just to see how we work together. And I think we kind of both walked away from that with the notion that, we could get married. So we kind of dated before we got married. So not only was it strategic, I very strategically went after some partnership stuff, knowing that was a potential kind of long-term strategic acquisitive partner.
Pete, this has been just incredibly fantastic. I can't think of a better way to say it. So thank you so much for being willing to take this time with us. Is there anything you'd like to promote today? And can you tell listeners how they can get in contact with you?
Yeah, so my sixth company, which is a lot of fun, is called Ask My Board. So it's www.askmyboard.com. And we really do two things. We are focused on helping companies grow a lot faster, whether you're stuck or whether you just want to grow faster. We have a whole methodology around that called the catapult method. And then, that could lead to an exit. So if somebody wants to just do an exit, we've got a service offering there. And if somebody just wants to grow with maybe an exit down the road, we help there too. So we both have lots of tools and content and both mastermind and kind of one-to-one coaching. So
fantastic.
But I just love helping entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur, as you guys could tell, and as we talked about, I'm an entrepreneur, and I love hanging out with other people that just are passionate about what they do and just trying to change the world and kind of drive a business.
Yeah, fantastic. Your passion for it really comes through.
Mm-hmm.
So listeners, if you would like help in maximizing the value of your business or planning for your eventual exit, you can reach Pat and Corby at 301-859-0860. You can reach me at 301-951-9090. And you can learn more about our firms at grfcpa.com and nslp.com. If you visit exitreadiness.com and you use the code podcast, you'll receive a 10% discount on all virtual products listed. Thanks for listening. And until next time, as always, this is Walter Dial and Pat Ennis signing off.